Welcome to Frutti Cheats. I'd really appreciate a comment. It tells me whether the story landed and how I can sharpen future pieces. I heard the joke before the laughter hit. Oh, Ryan. He'd do anything for it. The room paused for a beat, as if everyone was deciding whether laughing was safe. Then they laughed louder than the line deserved and sharper than it sounded coming from her mouth. I took a slow sip and kept my face neutral, watching the stem of my glass like I was studying the wine instead of the state of my marriage. I'm Ryan Carter, 40, a financial analyst in Denver. I stood in a rental loft with Edison bulbs hanging too low, a grazing table drowning in olives and cured meats, and a cluster of her co-workers who suddenly assumed they knew me. It wasn't my crowd, but I'd come because she asked. She'd said it would mean a lot if I showed up, smiled, shook hands, help her look good in front of people who measure value by quick takes and louder jokes. She wore the black dress I bought her last winter and moved through the room like it belonged to her. When the line landed and the laughter followed, she didn't look to me to see how I took it. She delivered it like a punchline that had won the night. I kept my hand steady. The glass made that precise soft click when crystal meets stone as I set it down. A project manager with an expensive watch glanced my way, waiting for a reaction like a spectator after a foul. I met his eyes and gave him nothing. People don't know what to do with a man who refuses to perform for a crowd. Relax. He knows I'm kidding, someone said. Another thinner laugh. Someone steered the conversation toward the herb garden on the balcony. My chest felt hollow and clean, the way a room feels after you move the furniture out. I watched her flip her hair back and collect small laughs from people who thought cruelty dressed as humor was a personality. The spread was good. Whoever catered it knew their business. I loaded a plate as if my biggest concern was chorizo and manchego. A woman from marketing asked about the mountains, the best drives, where to go when winter hits. I gave her a route, a coffee shop, a hike above timberline that steals your breath in the right month, saying it calmly as if my life hadn't just been condensed into a neat line about desperation. It wasn't the first time. Clean lines like that don't come from nowhere. Weeks of smaller digs had paved the runway. The eye roll at a gift I'd chosen thoughtfully, the smirk when I suggested a weekend plan, the brunch story that framed me as overeager because I double-checked the reservation. Nothing explosive, just slow erosion. A few months back she'd started talking about me like I was a dependable subscription she could cancel any time without penalty. Don't make such a big deal out of everything, she'd say, one of her favorites lately, using it like bubble wrap to soften whatever came next. She'd call me romantic around friends and needy when we were alone. She'd toss a joke about me chasing her in front of a cousin, smile at the cousin's laugh, then pat my arm like her touch could seal the disrespect before I noticed. I noticed. A stable man doesn't explode. He watches. He also doesn't ignore his own record. I could list payments by date and institution, vacations booked when she needed a reset, the overtime I covered so our life stayed easy. Numbers quiet noise. The balance sheet isn't a love letter, but it's a truth serum. Even in that loft with hanging lights and careful small talk, I felt the ledger settle. I walked the balcony once for air. The city threw back reflections from 1,000 windows. Down on the street a rideshare idled, hazards pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Inside, her laugh rose and drifted toward me. I leaned on the rail and let the night cool my wrists. People say humiliation burns. To me it felt like frost, the air right before snow when everything gets sharp enough to cut. Back inside I let conversations find me. Her boss talked cycling routes and altitude sickness and asked whether budgeting apps actually help people who don't make much. I answered directly. I was being the exact man I am. Steady voice, precise language, feet set. If anyone glanced to see whether the joke had rattled me, they saw a man unconcerned with approval. She came by once with a plate and a smile stretched a little too tight. "You trying the figs?" she asked. I nodded. Her perfume landed and then passed. She waited for me to throw her a lifeline, a soft joke to rescue her from the echo of her own punchline. I took a fig, thanked her, and let the space breathe. Sometimes silence isn't withholding. It's measurement. The party thinned. People began saying goodbyes in small clusters. Compliments about the view and the playlist were offered to no one in particular. Her friend hugged her, whispered something near her ear, and glanced at me with caution. I put on my jacket. She reached for my arm and touched the sleeve like she was checking the fabric. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. We thanked the host and rode the elevator down in a vertical hush. In the car she scrolled her phone, thumb moving like a metronome, keeping time against an empty beat. I drove the surface streets at a long light. A couple crossed in front of us, holding hands the way you do when you don't have anything to prove. The light changed and I didn't move. A horn tapped behind us. I eased forward and watched the couple disappear into the night. Home has its own temperature. You can tell a house is good by how it holds quiet. I hung my jacket, put the keys in the dish, and turned on the kitchen light. She poured a glass of water and leaned on the island like a judge about to hand down a lenient sentence. I cleaned my glass, set it upside down to dry, and checked the calendar on the fridge. The next few weeks were stacked with her plans, my deadlines, and a dinner with my sister I'd been postponing. I circled that dinner in my head. It didn't keep me awake. Sleep found me fast and full, like a decision had moved in and taken the empty room. Morning came with clean light through the blinds. I made coffee and watched the first steam rise. She walked in wrapped in a robe, hair still set in last night's wave. She waited for me to start the daily check-in that clears the air after a party. How was it? Who said what? What did you think? I tasted the coffee and let it sit long enough to feel the heat. The mug clicked softly when I set it down. Some answers reveal themselves without being asked. People imagine a boiling point. I don't. For me, it's a thin, permanent line you only see after you step past it. Last night drew that line crisp. I felt it settle the way a level bubble centers in glass. If you've rebuilt something real, you know the moment you stop sanding and start measuring. That's where I was. Coffee in hand in my kitchen, the city waking outside, the joke still hanging in the air like cheap cologne. Something was off. It wasn't me. Now that I could see it clearly, I knew exactly what to do with the clarity. The morning after the party moved quietly, like the city had decided to keep its voice down around me. She drifted through the kitchen, making light conversation about a podcast, a new gel manicure, a coworker's promotion. I let her words skim past like wind on a lake. Surface ripples, no depth. When she finally glanced over my mug and asked if I'd slept, I nodded once and said I had. It wasn't a lie. By lunch I'd sorted the practical layer no one sees. I moved my direct deposit to a separate checking account I'd opened months earlier and never used. I pulled copies of our tax returns, photographed the home inventory, and exported a password manager file into a printed list that fit inside a plain manila envelope. I set credit freezes with all 3 bureaus. None of it was hostile. It was housekeeping. What a man does when he stops pretending storms never arrive. That evening she came home bright with social energy. A friend had texted her screenshots from the party. The skyline, the charcuterie, somebody's badly framed boomerang of clinking glasses. Between images I caught a fragment of the caption she'd posted, "He's a good sport." The words worked hard to sound sweet. They read like a shrug. I cleaned the pan and told her dinner was ready. She thanked me without looking up and asked if we should go to Nora's rooftop thing on Friday. I told her yes. Some rooms you choose on purpose. Wednesday I heard it again. She was on speaker with a friend in the bedroom, voice floating down the hall as they recapped the party and treated laughs like trophies. "He'll do anything," she said, casual as a weather report. The friend hummed approval. I stood in the doorway and watched her shadow move across the wall. When she noticed me, she ended the call quickly and smiled like a child caught with a cookie. I didn't ask who it was. I asked one level, simple question. "Is that really how you see me?" She cocked her head, the practice smirk arriving on cue. "Relax. It's a joke," I said. "I heard you." That was the whole conversation. Sometimes 5 words are enough to mark a grave. The next morning I sat at my desk, not thinking about feelings but about systems. I reviewed the mortgage autopay, the car note, the utilities. I removed her authorized user card from one account and left the rest alone. I updated 2-factor on everything I personally owned. I pulled my passport and birth certificate from the safe and set them in the briefcase I use only for quarterly reviews. I added one soft thing, a clean shirt rolled tight, because planning is how you respect your future. The small public tests multiplied like gnats. At a Thursday happy hour, she told the table I freak out if we don't color code the groceries. It landed better than it deserved. I smiled with my eyes and asked the bartender about their rice selection. A colleague looked at me longer than polite, like she was checking for bruises and finding a mirror. Later in the rideshare, my wife nudged my shoulder and said I was being touchy. I said I was being patient. She counted it as a win. I counted it as inventory. Friday afternoon, I booked a consultation with a lawyer for the following week. I wrote down next steps and attached nothing. I texted my sister simply, "Dinner still on?" No emotional unloading. I was building a spine other people could see. At home, she tested the perimeter in different ways. A new dress appeared, a candle I liked burned in the bedroom. She leaned over me while I typed and asked if I wanted to take a break, voice pitched to sound playful. I said I had an early morning and turned back to a spreadsheet. In the window's reflection, I watched surprise cross her face and settle into calculation. Saturday, we met friends for brunch. She arrived a few minutes late to our own table, though we'd ridden together. A small stunt to create a solo entrance. She told a polished version of a story where I double-booked us. The punchline framed me as needy. The table laughed. It wasn't malicious, just lazy. I let it burn out on its own oxygen. When someone asked about market volatility, I offered a short metaphor about earthquakes and building codes. Heads nodded. The talk moved to travel. She reached under the table and squeezed my knee, a gesture designed to telegraph harmony. I kept my legs steady and returned to my coffee. There's a difference between peace and optics. Only one is worth keeping. That afternoon I cleaned the garage, labeled boxes I'd never bothered to label, put documents in a fireproof pouch and slid it behind an old toolbox she never opens. I changed my emergency contacts at work and removed her name. I updated my medical directive accordingly. No speeches. Paper carries authority precisely because it doesn't raise its voice. That night an apology arrived dressed as teasing. "Don't be so serious," she said, leaning in the doorframe. "People joke. You have to let things roll off you." I told her I'm built to let truth settle, not roll. She blinked, confused by the geometry of the answer, then tried another angle. "You know I love you." I said, "I know what love sounds like." The sentence ended there. She left the room and I finished folding laundry, a small discipline that keeps a man from mistaking motion for progress. By Sunday, the universe started sending confirmations in polite envelopes. One of her co-workers sent me a neutral text, "You good?" Nothing accusatory, just a temperature check from someone who'd watched the edges of a joke cut. I responded with a thumbs up and a line about busy season. He didn't push. People who recognize dignity don't tug at it. I met my sister that evening. We ate simple food and talked about our parents' old house and whether the roof finally needed replacing. She waited until dessert to ask about me, not my marriage. I told her I was training again, that I'd added a mile to my morning loop and it felt like reclaiming square footage inside my chest. She reached across the table and squeezed my forearm. She didn't ask for details. I paid the bill and walked her to her car. Monday at work I blocked 90 minutes and wrote 3 emails. The first to the lawyer confirming date and time, the second to HR listing the forms I'd need if personal status changed, the third to myself, a private ledger of facts, dates, locations, lines spoken, not a diary, a timeline. If anyone ever asked why I acted, I'd answer without heat. The document ended with one sentence. Respect isn't a feeling, it's a policy. Midweek an invitation arrived. A colleague's promotion party, same circle, same rooftop view, same audience that knows how to laugh on command. She floated the idea at dinner, watching me carefully. I held her gaze, took a measured breath, and said yes again. Her shoulders loosened like she'd won back something fragile. What she didn't see was the line through my decision. Before bed I stood in the doorway and watched the house at rest. The small hums, the predictable clicks, the faithful systems doing their jobs. I thought about structures, loads and spans, and what fails first when corners are cut. People imagine marriages collapse in a single dramatic event. Sometimes they do. More often, they fail inspection months before the roof caves. That week had been an inspection. Joists measured, nails counted, rot circled in red. By Friday morning I'd ironed the shirt I'd packed and set it in the briefcase. Not a threat. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who'd stopped negotiating with the part of himself that wants to be liked by rooms that don't matter. The pressure had done its work. It hadn't been me. It had formed an edge. All that was left now was a room, a view, and a sentence said once, clearly, with witnesses. The promotion party looked like a replica of the last. Same skyline, same Edison bulbs, same crowd tuned to laugh on cue. We stepped out of the elevator into music and the smell of rosemary cocktails. I felt steady, Like the hard work had already been done in silence, and this was only delivery. The shirt I'd ironed lay clean under my jacket in the briefcase, along with my passport, copies, and the single rolled shirt. Proof that planning isn't drama, it's respect for your next move. She warmed to the room fast, collecting orbit. Familiar faces, familiar small talk. I spoke when spoken to and let the view do the heavy lifting. The city had that clear night sharpness that makes edges honest. A colleague told me he'd started investing. I gave him one sentence about liquidity and sleep, and he nodded like I'd said something wise. Half an hour in a ring of people formed by the railing. She stood at the center, black dress catching the string lights. Conversation slid to relationships, low-hanging fruit for people who don't want to talk about themselves. Someone said, "You two seem solid." She smiled, head tilted, scanning the audience like a performer scans a stage. Then she reached for the line she'd been workshopping, the one that had bought her a laugh before. "Please, Ryan would do anything for it." There it was, casual, public, designed to ride the wave and break on my face. The circle laughed out of habit. It sounded like an appliance kicking on. I let it run, then stepped into the pocket of silence that follows every cheap laugh. I didn't look angry. I looked exactly like a man who had decided what happens next. "You're right," I said. "I did do anything. Mortgage, insurance, car notes, the trips you needed when work got overwhelming, the dinners you posted, the quiet work no one claps for because it shows up on time." No one moved. Somewhere behind us a glass touched stone and made that small bell sound. I let the list breathe. But there's one thing I won't do. I won't stay married to someone who confuses loyalty with weakness. Her smile collapsed without falling. The group shifted like a single animal. No one reached for a joke to save the moment. A couple looked down as if the floor had breaking news. One of her co-workers, same watch as last week, froze in that way men do when they recognize an edge. I took my keys from my pocket and slid the house key off the ring. That soft scrape of metal felt louder than the music. I set the key in the garage opener on the cocktail table next to the host's small succulents arranged to look spontaneous. I kept my eyes on her face and my tone even. "Since you think I'm that desperate, consider this your freedom." Joke's over. There was nothing else to add. I wasn't interested in making a case. Cases plead. Decisions end. I turned, buttoned my jacket, took the briefcase by its handle, and walked with the kind of pace you use when you're leaving a building that's already been condemned. People parted without meaning to. Someone breathed, "Wah!" like we were in a movie. The host looked relieved and stricken at the same time. The elevator doors opened on their own timing, the way good doors do when you've earned your exit. The city followed me down in reflections. In the lobby, the quiet hit like a fresh sheet being pulled tight. I stepped into the night, called a ride, and felt that steady internal click you get when a measurement lands dead center. The driver asked for the destination, and I gave him the address I'd booked an hour earlier. A short-term rental near the park with a door code and an empty closet. I texted no one. My phone stayed face down on my thigh for the whole drive. Upstairs, the place smelled like lemon cleaner and new paint. I set the briefcase on the table, took off my jacket, and rolled the cuffs of my shirt like a man about to fix a sink. Small tasks first. I signed out of shared locations, logged out of the SmartArt Home app, and removed my card from the 2 accounts she used for convenience. I cracked a window and let the night air in. City noise, yes, but honest. My phone lit up on the table. Her name, then again, a short bubble, then a longer one. I didn't touch it. I'd said what mattered in the only room that needed hearing it. Everything else would try to drag me back into the theater where jokes work like smoke machines. I don't breathe that. I took a quick, practical shower that reset the day, shaved because small proofs steady a man, and in the mirror I looked like myself, just not the version willing to trade silence for easy comfort. I hung the single rolled shirt in the empty closet. It read like a declaration. Maybe it was. Messages piled as the hour turned. A friend of hers, then the coworker with a watch, then an unknown number that began, "We should talk." I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and left it face up. I wasn't hiding. I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of the tidy bed, and listened to the building's hum. Even machines have integrity when they're maintained. I thought of my father teaching the difference between quitting and leaving. Quitting is an argument you keep trying to win. Leaving is a decision you honor without witnesses. I'd given witnesses enough for one night. The rest would be paperwork, calendars, and a voice that never rose. Before sleep, I emailed the attorney one line. Proceed per our consultation. No attachments. No flourish. I set a reminder to stop the last autopays tied to our joint comforts, closed the briefcase lid, and switched off the lamp. Outside the city cycled its lights. Somewhere above the park a plane dragged itself toward elsewhere. I lay back and let the room settle. People picture revenge as noise. Mine was clean air, a clear sentence in a crowded room, a key set down where everyone could see it. Sleep came like it had been waiting for permission. I woke before dawn to find the phone where I'd left it, heavy with everything I wouldn't say. I laced my shoes and ran the loop by the lake until my breath cut a crisp ribbon in the air. Then came back to a life that had already begun without asking for approval. Respect isn't negotiated, it's enforced. Last night wasn't a scene, it was a policy taking effect. Morning makes everything louder when a line's been crossed. My phone lit up while I tied my laces. Missed calls stacked, texts climbing the screen like ivy searching for a surface. The messages traced predictable arcs: confusion, embarrassment, bargaining, blame. First came the soft openers. "We need to talk. You can't just leave like that." Then the edits. "It was a joke. Everyone knew." Then the accusation. "You humiliated me." I let the screen go dark. Silence isn't punishment. It's policy. Work felt like a relief. The way tasks are when they have edges. Numbers, deadlines, documents with headers. I answered emails, signed a vendor contract, sent an update to a client who only cares if something works. Mid-morning 2 texts arrived from unknown numbers introducing themselves as our friends. One checking if I was okay, the other claiming I'd overreacted. I replied to neither. Adults don't litigate marriages in group chats. By lunch the ripple reached my sister. She asked if I wanted tacos or space. I chose space and thanked her for asking the right way. I ate at my desk and watched the city browse itself outside the window. The party replayed in short clips that didn't sting. The memory carried no heat, only the clarity of something done correctly the first time. The next wave hit in the afternoon. A coworker from her office emailed one sentence: "You didn't deserve that," and signed his name. He'd stood in that ring and looked away when the laugh landed. Men know when they've witnessed something they shouldn't have allowed. I sent a polite acknowledgement and went back to the spreadsheet. At 4 o'clock reception pinged me. A visitor in the lobby, no appointment, asking for me by name. I didn't need the camera feed to know who it was. I told them to inform her I wasn't available and to call building security if she refused to leave. 10 minutes later the guard called. Situation resolved. His tone carried. Professional. I appreciate competence in any field. After work I drove to the rental and made dinner the way I always do when I need to feel the floor under me. Knife steady, pan hot, salt when it matters. I ate at the small table by the window and watched a couple argue in the parking lot. Not loudly, just insistently, trying to shape air into a different answer. I washed the plate and set it to dry. The phone blinked again, a photo of us from a better year and a line about not throwing away history. History isn't thrown away. It gets archived when it stops telling the truth. I spent Saturday on the small mechanics of separation. A storage unit in my name, a P.O. box, the last autopay rerouted to the new account. I booked a meeting with the realtor to determine equity and timeline. While measuring the closet for boxes, the phone buzzed with a new phase. She wanted to meet in a public place and said she deserved a chance to explain. Deserve loses weight when it rides on the back of mockery. I let the message sit with the rest. By afternoon, the social consequences bloomed. A mutual friend sent a screenshot of her post, a generic square with a quote about grace and growth. Comments split between hearts and careful compliments. 20 minutes later, it vanished. Digital repentance is usually tested against engagement before it becomes conviction. I took a walk and counted steps to the corner because discipline keeps a man from drifting when storms try to pull. Monday she tried a different door, a gift bag at my office reception, black dress folded into tissue, a candle, the house key I'd left on the table, threaded onto a ribbon as if rehabilitated by craft. A note pierced the paper with a sentence about starting over. I instructed reception to mark the package refused and return it to sender. Starting over requires wood that hasn't been warped by whether you chose. Midweek the retaliation phase arrived with the desperation that follows failed seduction. A long message accusing me of emotional cruelty, of abandoning her, of collaborating with strangers to embarrass her. She framed the publicness like it was my invention. I thought of the elevator, the ring of faces, the way the room held the word anything like a toy, then set the phone face down. If you honor your own boundaries, nothing a storm says about you sticks. Consequences aren't only social, they're logistical. She tried to log into an account I no longer connected to our life. The credit freeze I placed did what it was supposed to do. Stopped a forgotten password from becoming a new card. A fraud alert pinged my email with a timestamp that matched her last angry text by 3 minutes. I brewed coffee and forwarded the alert to the folder labeled process. There was a small relief in systems that work because you built them before you needed them. By Friday, the universe had done some of my work without my asking. Her boss pulled her from a client training she'd been angling for, citing optics. 2 of her closest co-workers unfollowed her private account. A third reached out to me again, not for gossip but to say he respected how I handled it. Reputation isn't a scoreboard, it's a weather report, and everyone dresses accordingly. She tried one last approach. Nostalgia scaled up to pleading, a long midnight text listing every good memory in bright detail as if inventory could rebuild structure. The beach, the promotion we celebrated with takeout on the floor, my father's funeral where she held my elbow during the eulogy and didn't let go. I read it once and let its weight sit where it belonged, in the past. Respect is the only glue that keeps memory from becoming a weapon. Once respect is gone, memory turns sharp. On Saturday, my sister dropped by with a toolbox and a plant. We set the plant in the light and tightened a loose cabinet hinge in the small kitchen. We didn't dissect what happened because nothing was wrong with my decision. We talked about a 10K in October and her kid's science project. Late that night, a final message came through. Short, plain, no exclamation points. She wrote that she understood now why the joke landed the way it did, that she hadn't meant it, that she wanted to fix it. Understanding is not repair. There's no counterweight for public contempt except the boundary that removes you from its reach. I turned the phone over and clicked off the lamp. This is what breakdown looks like when you refuse to be drafted into someone else's chaos. Panic, then seduction, then blame, then public weather changing without your input. I answered to the only jurisdiction that matters, the standard I hold for myself. She had her laugh. I had my line. Everything after that was gravity doing what it always does when you stop pretending it won't. Finality didn't arrive with a bang. It appeared as appointments that started on time and ended with signatures. The attorney laid out options, timelines, best and worst cases. I listened, asked plain questions, and made decisions the way I do at work. Scope, cost, outcome. We filed. Service went out. She replied with the kind of shock people reserve for consequences they thought theoretical. There were attempts to slow things with feelings. I stayed with facts. Whenever a message tried to drag me into argument, I read it once and returned to the checklist. We met once in a neutral conference room for mediation. She wore the black dress like fabric might reopen a door she'd already bricked over with jokes. I brought a folder, a pen, and a quiet posture. The mediator spoke in soft rhythms about common ground. There wasn't much to find. She wanted the house. I wanted neither the house nor the fight over it. I asked for a listing date, a fair split, and a clean exit from each other's accounts. She asked for time. I nodded at the calendar and said we would honor it, provided the dates were real, not sentimental. The conversation circled and jerked forward the way these things do when one person still wants the old script. At one point she said, "We can fix this if you stop being so absolute." The mediator's eyes flicked toward me. My voice stayed level. Respect is absolute. Nothing more. We moved on to vehicles, household contents, the joint card that never should have existed as long as it did. At the end, the mediator thanked us for being civil. I don't aim for civil. I aim for clear. Friends sorted themselves without my nudging. Those who lived on gossip drifted away, and the ones who liked me for my steadiness stayed put. My sister and I ran that 10K in October. The air cut clean and my feet felt like they belonged to someone who'd carried his own weight and set the rest down. After the finish line, she handed me a bottle of water and said, "You look like yourself again." I did. That's the point. When the house listed, I walked through once with the realtor. The room sounded different, empty. I took what I owned and nothing else. The rest went into 2 piles, hers and donation. I left a short note taped inside a kitchen drawer with the alarm codes I'd already turned over and the date the utilities would change. No message beneath the message, just logistics the same way I found them. She tried for one last summit before signing. A late-night text asked for coffee at the place where we used to split a muffin and read the paper. I didn't answer. The next morning I ran, showered, and drove to the attorney's office. Papers feel heavier than they are when you understand their meaning. I initialed where needed and signed my name where it belonged. The attorney slid a copy across the table and said, "You handled this well." I nodded and slid the folder into my briefcase. Handling it well was never for applause. It was for sleep. Afterward, I went back to the rental and did the small things I do when a chapter ends. Laundry, a grocery run, a call to my barber. I changed the oil in my car with my own hands because the motion steadies me. That evening, the sky over the park turned a particular blue, the kind that only lasts 15 minutes in late summer. I sat on the steps and watched people walk their dogs. Ordinary is a privilege when you've earned it. I made a list, not of traits I wanted, but of non-negotiables I would honor. The first line read, "No public contempt." The second said, "No jokes that cost dignity." The third was shorter than a word. "Listen. Men are told to move on." I moved forward, which is different. Moving on tries to outrun the past. Moving forward keeps your eyes open and your spine straight. The last loose ends tied themselves with less drama than I'd prepared for. The house sold, funds hit escrow, and then our separate accounts. She moved into a place her friend found, closer to the office and smaller than she wanted, and I heard that from a coworker who no longer called himself a friend. Every so often someone asks if I regret ending it publicly with witnesses. I tell them the truth. I ended it privately. The public part was a single sentence that named reality where it was created. Everything else happened in quiet rooms with forms and clocks. If you think exposure is revenge, you haven't understood the architecture. Exposure is just light. What the light finds is on you. Months later I ran into her by accident outside a downtown gallery. We saw each other at the same time. She looked like someone who'd learned about gravity the hard way. She said my name like a door creaking open. I said hers like a polite nod to a neighbor. She opened her mouth and then closed it. There are apologies that live in the throat and never make it to air because the listener doesn't need them. We stood in that clean, awkward moment. Two people who'd once shared a life and now shared a sidewalk. I wished her a good evening and stepped past. I moved out of the rental and into a smaller place with morning light and a quiet hallway. I hung nothing on the walls for a week, the way you sit in a new house and listen first. Then I hung 3 things: a map of the Front Range, a photo of my father and me kneeling by a tackle box, and a simple framed print above the desk that reads policy. It is art. It's a reminder. Feelings change. Policy does not. On my first night there I cooked a steak with green beans, ate with the window open, music low, a book face down waiting for me to return. My phone buzzed once with a number I didn't know. I let it go. The new neighbor across the hall knocked to borrow a corkscrew. I handed it over and said good night without the need to impress or perform. Later I texted my sister a photo of the view. She sent back a thumbs up and a heart. The best people don't require a speech to understand your piece. I won't pretend I never think about the old house or the years that were good. They were real, and they're finished. What I carry isn't anger or a story about villains. I carry the policy I should have written sooner. I will not share my life with someone who mocks the hand that steadies the table. That's not a rule for other people. It's a rule for me. There's a quiet irony to how it ended. She said I'd do anything for it. Meaning attention, intimacy, proximity to a woman who treated laughter like leverage. The truth is simpler. I did the one thing a man who respects himself must always be willing to do. I walked away and didn't look back. I refused to lose myself again. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Frutti Cheats.